So one person wrote in some comments about our whole discussion on the critical judgmental mind. And so I thought I would read this because it's quite good. So a few days ago, you gave a talk on Bodhisattva Breakfast Corner about the critical judgmental mind. A monastic had asked for advice on dealing with this mind, and she saw herself immersed in negative thinking about others in her community. I was reflecting on what you said and think it depends on what is meant by judgmental. If we are constantly fault-finding and nitpicking and recognize it as a pattern in our lives, then yes, as somebody shared during the discussion, looking at the faults of others can be a way of taking the focus off of ourselves and distracting ourselves from getting in touch with our needs and or our unsuitable behavior. Right? On the other hand, sometimes we can seek to make an honest assessment while at the same time trying to see our part in a given situation. For example, I was recently in a work situation where I was offered a job in a small business that my brother owned. My brother felt that he was my boss, and that since we were siblings, he could speak to me any way he pleased. We're like that with our relatives, aren't we? He was under a lot of stress. I tried to recognize this and have compassion for him. And he did not have many healthy tools to deal with his stress. Anger is a real issue for him, and he would blow up at me, his family, and others. I tried hard to be patient with him, and several times calmly asked him to speak to me in a more respectful way. But I also must recognize my limitations and know that despite the fact that I'm a Dharma practitioner, I am not a Buddha yet, and must therefore therefore need to find circumstances that are more conducive for my spiritual growth. In addition, another employee in the shop was a friend of my brother, and this guy was a marijuana addict. He would step outside to take a puff of pot every 20 minutes or so, no exaggeration. He was also very insecure and would talk incessantly. Once again, I tried to be an example for him, talking about recovery and positive things, but I also knew it was not my responsibility to change him. The only one I truly have the power to change is myself and the way I relate to any given situation. And that's exactly what I did. Bottom line is my honest assessment was that yes, there were times I could have handled things better, but it's also true that I needed to make a change for my own mental well-being and spiritual growth. Thankfully, I managed to part ways with no hard feelings and still have a good relationship with my brother. Looking back on the situation, I found that I was judgmental not only about my brother's anger, but also what I saw as the constant locker room behavior. For example, homophobic and sexist jokes that my brother and his friend tried to pull me into. I would think to myself, I wish these guys would stop acting like teenage morons. And at one point even mentioned that to them. I even asked them to stop including me in their immature conversations. I found my own reaction to be very strong in terms of judgmental aversion towards them. And even though ultimately I made a change by leaving the job, the judgmental aversion is the part I needed to look at within myself. So I thought he really clearly saw everything, you know, kind of what is my mind going, you know, too much on the judgmental thing, just picking at people and, you know, emphasizing negativities and getting myself in a bad mood and then speaking harmfully about others. He was able to see that, but he was also able to see that the situation was too stressful for him, and that you know, he did have what he considered some reasonable requests that he tried to express, but didn't get anywhere with that. And therefore, for his own emotional and spiritual sanity and stability, he decided to leave the job. And yet he was able to do it, it seems like, in a way where he didn't dump all his judgment and criticism on the other people, and managed to create a good relationship, to part with a good relationship. So I think that's quite good. And I think he really rounded out our discussion by showing that, we may be critical and judgmental, but there may also be things in the situation that it's quite legitimate to ask or request that they change. And if they change, good, and if they don't, then we make our decision based on that. Mm-hmm.
I think what really strikes me about that assessment is that he really understood where his power was coming from. So often I feel like I get myself in that kind of situation, and I feel like there's no way to escape except for the other person to change. In reality, what he saw is that, okay, I do need a job, but I'm going to have to leave this job. That's just what's going to have to happen.
Yeah.
And so what I think it's really nice to be able to see that you always have the power to change your situation.
Right. Yeah, that so often we frame a situation like, I don't have a choice.
Right.
I can't leave the job, but I can't stand staying in it.
Right.
And whereas he saw, well, he does need a job, but not this one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that his own stability is more important than being in that kind of environment. And that, like you said, he had the power to change the situation. He didn't have to go along with it. Yeah, because it's true, we often do just say to ourselves, I can do this or I can do that, and I don't want to do either of them. We so often limit our own options. Okay. Oh, I should, before we stop, one other person wrote and said, when I have a judgmental mind and critical thoughts about someone, I start the metta verses, may you be happy, may you be free of suffering, and so on. And this stops my critical thinking. Yeah. So that's also, another way to really deal with it. Of course, sometimes we say, may you be happy, and then our anger says, why should I wish them to be happy? They're making me so unhappy. And then to ask ourselves, well, what, I want them to suffer? And does wanting somebody to suffer go along with my own values and principles? Do I want to be a person who wishes people to suffer? Why not wish them to be happy? Because if they were happy, they wouldn't be behaving like this. Yeah, so that's also quite good. But sometimes when our mind is resistant to generating loving kindness for somebody, we need to, sit down, have a little talk with our negative mind and say, listen here, it doesn't hurt you at all to wish somebody well, and you may even benefit from it. And, okay.